Question 1. Performance analysis shows that the claims processing department at Talanx is experiencing delays due to manual data entry and verification steps. To improve efficiency, a proposal has been made to automate data entry using a new software solution that scans and inputs claim details directly. However, the proposal does not include a detailed assessment of the software's data security features or its compliance with data protection regulations relevant to Talanx's operations. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Halt the implementation and conduct a thorough review of the proposed software, focusing on its data security protocols, compliance with relevant data protection laws, and its integration with existing Talanx compliance frameworks before any further steps are taken. Option B. Delegate the decision to the claims processing department manager, allowing them to implement the software if they deem it efficient enough, without further oversight. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the new software immediately to address the identified delays, as efficiency is the primary driver for improvement. Option D. Implement the software but instruct the IT department to implement basic security measures as a secondary step after the system is operational. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation of the new software immediately to address the identified delays, as efficiency is the primary driver for improvement. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct within the specific framework of Talanx's operational environment, which is governed by relevant financial services regulations. The need to optimize processes must not compromise the integrity of client data, the accuracy of financial reporting, or adherence to data protection principles. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing solutions that are vetted for compliance with Talanx's internal policies and applicable regulations. This includes ensuring any changes do not negatively impact data security, client confidentiality, or the accuracy of information used for regulatory reporting. This approach is correct because it prioritizes a holistic view, integrating operational improvements with a strong foundation of regulatory adherence and ethical responsibility, which is paramount in the financial services industry. An approach that focuses solely on cost reduction, without considering the impact on data integrity or regulatory reporting, would be incorrect. This could lead to breaches of data protection laws, inaccurate financial statements, and potential regulatory sanctions. Similarly, implementing new technology without a thorough risk assessment and compliance check could introduce vulnerabilities or violate data privacy regulations, making it professionally unacceptable. An approach that bypasses established internal review and approval processes for the sake of speed also fails to uphold the necessary checks and balances required by regulatory bodies and internal governance, risking noncompliance and operational errors. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape and Talanx's internal compliance policies. When faced with process optimization opportunity, they should first assess potential impacts on data security, client privacy, and regulatory reporting accuracy. Any proposed changes should then undergo a rigorous review process involving relevant compliance and legal departments before implementation. This ensures that efficiency gains are achieved responsibly and ethically, safeguarding both the company and its clients. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal that certain operational workflows within Talanx are experiencing delays and increased error rates. In response, a proposal has been made to streamline these processes by adopting a new methodology. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Talanx's commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical operations? Option A. Implement process changes that prioritize significant cost reduction and operational speed, with a secondary review for regulatory compliance after initial deployment. Option B. Adopt a new process methodology that has proven successful in a different financial services market, assuming it will be broadly applicable and beneficial for Talanx. Option C. Focus on accelerating the implementation of the new methodology to achieve rapid efficiency gains, with regulatory checks conducted only if specific issues arise. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing Talanx processes to identify inefficiencies. Then design revised procedures that enhance operational effectiveness, while explicitly integrating and reinforcing adherence to all relevant regulatory frameworks. Correct answer is A. Implement process changes that prioritize significant cost reduction and operational speed, with a secondary review for regulatory compliance after initial deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in process optimization within Talanx, a financial services organization. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain strict adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Misinterpreting or overlooking these obligations during process optimization can lead to significant compliance breaches, reputational damage, and financial penalties. Therefore, careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed improvements do not compromise Talanx's commitment to regulatory integrity and customer trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing Talanx processes to identify inefficiencies, followed by the development of revised procedures that demonstrably enhance operational effectiveness, while explicitly incorporating and reinforcing compliance with all relevant regulatory frameworks. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the integration of regulatory adherence as a foundational element of process optimization, rather than afterthought. It ensures that Talanx's commitment to regulatory compliance, as mandated by its operating jurisdiction, assumed to be Germany for Talanx, thus governed by BaFin regulations and relevant EU directives, is not only maintained but actively strengthened through optimized processes. This proactive stance aligns with the principles of sound governance and risk management expected of financial institutions. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive assessment of regulatory impact is an incorrect approach. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations Talanx has to its clients and regulators. Such an approach risks implementing changes that, while potentially cost-saving, could inadvertently lead to non-compliance with data protection laws, anti-money laundering regulation, or consumer protection directives, resulting in severe penalties. Prioritizing speed of implementation over thoroughness in process redesign is also incorrect. This haste can lead to the overlooking of critical control points or the introduction of new vulnerabilities within Talanx's operations. Regulatory frameworks often mandate specific controls and procedures to mitigate risks. A rushed implementation may bypass these, creating a compliance gap and exposing Talanx to regulatory scrutiny and potential enforcement actions. Implementing changes based on industry best practices observed in other jurisdictions, without verifying their applicability and compliance within Talanx's specific regulatory environment, is another incorrect approach. Financial regulations are jurisdiction-specific. What is permissible or standard practice in one country may be a violation in another. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence regarding Talanx's local regulatory obligations, potentially leading to breaches of German or EU financial services law. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Talanx should adopt a systematic approach to process optimization that begins with a clear understanding of the current regulatory landscape governing their operations. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and guidelines. When proposing process improvements, the primary consideration must be how these changes impact compliance. A robust risk assessment should be conducted for any proposed optimization, specifically evaluating potential regulatory breaches. Furthermore, any new or revised process must be designed with built-in controls that ensure ongoing adherence to regulatory requirements. Collaboration with legal and compliance departments is crucial throughout the optimization lifecycle to ensure that all proposed changes are vetted for regulatory soundness before implementation. Question 3. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the time taken for Talanx's customer onboarding process, impacting client satisfaction scores. Which of the following approaches best addresses this issue while adhering to regulatory frameworks and maintaining client trust? Option A. Outsourcing the entire onboarding process to a third-party vendor without conducting thorough due diligence on their compliance procedures. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive review of the current onboarding workflow to identify specific bottlenecks, assessing the impact of any proposed changes on regulatory compliance and data security, and then implementing targeted improvements with appropriate oversight. Option C. Implementing a fully automated end-to-end digital onboarding system that bypasses manual checks to expedite the process. Option D. Reducing the number of required documentation checks to speed up the process, assuming clients will provide accurate information. The correct answer is C. Implementing a fully automated end-to-end digital onboarding system that bypasses manual checks to expedite the process. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficiency and cost reduction with the paramount duty to protect client interests and adhere to regulatory requirements. Talanx, as a financial services provider, operates under strict regulatory oversight, demanding that any process optimization efforts do not compromise compliance, data security, or the quality of service provided to clients. The challenge lies in identifying improvements that are both beneficial to the company and fully compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing changes that are evaluated against regulatory frameworks, client impact, and operational feasibility. This approach prioritizes compliance and client well-being by ensuring that any optimization is conducted within the bounds of regulations, such as those governing data handling, customer communication, and risk management. It also involves seeking appropriate internal approvals and potentially external consultation to validate the compliance of proposed changes. This ensures that Talanx maintains its integrity and avoids potential regulatory sanctions or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. For instance, automating client communication without ensuring the automated messages meet regulatory disclosure requirements or data privacy standards, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or specific Talanx internal policies derived from regulatory obligations, would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach might be to streamline internal reporting by reducing the frequency or depth of checks without assessing the impact on risk identification and mitigation, potentially violating internal control frameworks mandated by regulators. Furthermore, implementing new technology without adequate due diligence on its compliance with data security and client confidentiality regulations would expose Talanx to severe risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Talanx's operations. This involves identifying all applicable laws, industry guidelines, and internal policies. When considering process optimization, the framework should include a risk assessment phase, evaluating potential impacts on compliance, client service, data security, and operational integrity. Solutions should then be developed and vetted against these criteria, with a strong emphasis on seeking expert advice, legal, compliance, IT security, before implementation. Continuous monitoring and review post-implementation are also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a recurring pattern of delays in Talanx's customer onboarding process, impacting client satisfaction scores. To address this, a proposal suggests streamlining the identity verification step by reducing the number of required documents, aiming for a faster turnaround. However, this proposal has not undergone a formal review by the Compliance Department to assess its alignment with Know Your Customer (KIC) regulation. Which approach should Talanx adopt? Option A. Halt the proposed streamlining and initiate a comprehensive review by the Compliance Department to ensure adherence to all relevant KYC regulations before any changes are considered. Option B. Proceed with the streamlining, but instruct the onboarding team to manually flag any potentially high-risk clients for additional scrutiny, relying on individual judgment to compensate for reduced documentation. Option C. Implement the proposed streamlining of the identity verification process immediately to improve client satisfaction and operational efficiency, assuming the reduction in documents is a minor change. Option D. Defer the process optimization until a new, more advanced digital verification system is implemented, which may take several months, to avoid any potential regulatory issues with the current proposal. The correct answer is C. Implement the proposed streamlining of the identity verification process immediately to improve client satisfaction and operational efficiency, assuming the reduction in documents is a minor change. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Talanx to balance operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The pressure to optimize processes can sometimes lead to shortcuts that might inadvertently compromise data integrity or customer protection, which are paramount in the financial services industry. Careful judgment is needed to ensure that any process improvements do not violate the principles of fairness, transparency, and security mandated by regulatory bodies. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing solutions that are not only effective, but also compliant with all relevant regulations. This includes ensuring that any changes do not negatively impact data privacy, customer service levels, or the accuracy of financial reporting. Regulatory adherence is not merely a box-ticking exercise, but a fundamental aspect of responsible business practice, safeguarding both the company and its clients. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness risks overlooking critical regulatory requirements. For instance, automating a process without adequately testing its compliance with data protection laws could lead to breaches and significant penalties. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing changes that, while seemingly efficient, create new risks or exacerbate existing ones, such as increasing the likelihood of errors in customer onboarding or claims processing, which could violate consumer protection regulations. Focusing solely on cost reduction without considering the broader impact on compliance and customer trust is also a failure, as it neglects the long-term reputational and financial consequences of regulatory noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates regulatory considerations from the outset of any process optimization initiative. This involves forming cross-functional teams, including compliance and legal experts, to review proposed changes. A risk-based assessment should be conducted for each proposed optimization, evaluating potential impacts on regulatory adherence, data security, customer outcomes, and operational resilience, prioritizing solutions that demonstrably enhance efficiency without compromising these critical areas, ensures a sustainable and compliant business operation for Talanx. Question 5. Strategic planning requires Talanx to optimize its internal claims processing procedures to enhance efficiency and reduce operational costs. Which of the following approaches best balances these objectives with the imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. Implementing automated decision-making tools for claim adjudication without a comprehensive review of their impact on regulatory compliance and without human oversight for complex cases. Option B. Prioritizing the fastest possible implementation of new software solutions for claims management, assuming that standard industry practices will inherently meet all regulatory requirements. Option C. Focusing exclusively on cost-saving measures by streamlining documentation requirements for claimants, even if it means potentially reducing the thoroughness of the assessment process. Option D. Conducting a thorough analysis of current claims processing workflows, identifying bottlenecks and areas for improvement, and then developing and implementing revised processes in close collaboration with Talanx's compliance and legal departments to ensure adherence to all relevant regulations and ethical standards. The correct answer is A. Implementing automated decision-making tools for claim adjudication without a comprehensive review of their impact on regulatory compliance and without human oversight for complex cases. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Talanx, as a financial services provider, operates within a highly regulated environment. Process optimization efforts must not only aim for efficiency and cost-effectiveness, but also strictly adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The challenge lies in balancing these objectives, ensuring that improvements do not inadvertently lead to noncompliance or ethical breaches, which could result in significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Careful judgment is required to identify optimization strategies that are both beneficial and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential areas for improvement, followed by the development and implementation of changes that are demonstrably compliant with all applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. This includes engaging with compliance and legal departments to validate proposed changes. This approach is correct because it prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical conduct. which are foundational to Talanx's license to operate and its reputation. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management expected of financial institutions, ensuring that operational changes do not compromise client protection or market integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to shortcuts that violate data privacy regulations, e.g., GDPR if applicable to Talanx's operations, anti-money laundering (AML) requirements, or customer protection rules. For example, automating customer onboarding without ensuring robust identity verification processes could breach AML regulations. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment is also professionally flawed. This might involve deploying new systems or procedures without adequate testing or without understanding how they interact with existing compliance frameworks. This could result in unintended consequences, such as errors in reporting or inadequate controls, leading to regulatory breaches. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without consulting relevant stakeholders, such as compliance officers or legal counsel, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to integrate compliance into the design of new processes, increasing the likelihood of non-compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the objectives of the process optimization. Second, conduct a comprehensive assessment of the current process, identifying pain points and inefficiencies. Third, brainstorm potential solutions, critically evaluating each against regulatory requirements, ethical considerations, and business objectives. Fourth, engage relevant subject matter experts, including compliance and legal teams, to review and approve proposed changes. Fifth, develop a detailed implementation plan that includes robust testing and monitoring mechanisms to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Finally, establish a feedback loop for continuous improvement and adaptation to evolving regulatory landscapes. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that Talanx's claims processing department is experiencing significant delays, impacting customer satisfaction. To address this, a proposal suggests implementing a new automated system that would expedite claim approvals by reducing the number of manual checks. However, this system would bypass certain verification steps currently mandated by Talanx's internal risk management framework and relevant industry guidelines for financial services. Which approach should Talanx prioritize to optimize claims processing while upholding its regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Prioritize cost savings by adopting the automated system as proposed, assuming that minor deviations from internal checks are acceptable for the sake of speed. Option B. Implement the new automated system immediately to achieve rapid efficiency gains and improve customer satisfaction scores. Option C. Delay the implementation of any new system until a complete overhaul of all Talanx's operational processes can be undertaken, even if it means prolonged inefficiency. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed automated system, focusing on how it can be adapted to meet all regulatory requirements and Talanx's internal risk management standards before full implementation. The correct answer is B. Implement the new automated system immediately to achieve rapid efficiency gains and improve customer satisfaction scores. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Talanx, as a financial services provider, operates within a highly regulated environment. Process optimization efforts must not only aim for efficiency, but also strictly adhere to regulatory requirements, ethical standards, and the company's internal policies. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of cost savings and improved operational speed with the imperative to maintain compliance, protect client interests, and uphold the integrity of Talanx's operations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed changes do not inadvertently create new risks or violate established guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the development of revised procedures that are demonstrably compliant with all relevant regulations and internal Talanx policies. This approach prioritizes a systematic and risk-aware methodology. Specifically, it requires understanding the regulatory framework governing Talanx's operations, such as those pertaining to data protection, customer due diligence, and financial reporting. By ensuring that any optimized process is vetted against these requirements, Talanx can achieve efficiency gains without compromising its legal and ethical obligations. This aligns with the principle of responsible business conduct and the need to maintain client trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. Instance, streamlining customer onboarding by bypassing mandatory identity verification steps would violate anti-money laundering (AML) regulations and potentially lead to significant fines and reputational damage for Talanx. Another incorrect approach might involve automating client communication in a way that reduces personal interaction to a point where it compromises the ability to identify and address client needs or concerns, potentially breaching principles of fair treatment of customers and good governance. Furthermore, implementing new software solutions without adequate data security protocols could expose sensitive client information, violating data privacy laws and Talanx's duty of care. Professionals at Talanx should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives of process optimization. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of the current state, identifying areas for improvement. Crucially, any proposed changes must be evaluated against the applicable regulatory landscape and Talanx's internal risk appetite and compliance framework. Stakeholder consultation, including legal and compliance departments, is essential to ensure that proposed optimizations are robust and defensible. The final decision should be based on a holistic view that balances efficiency gains with regulatory compliance, ethical considerations, and the long-term sustainability of Talanx's business. Question 7. Investigation of potential process optimization initiatives at Talanx. Which approach would best balance efficiency gains with regulatory compliance and operational integrity? Option A. Relying on industry best practices and competitor analysis to adopt new processes without extensive internal validation. Option B. Implementing the latest AI-driven automation tools across all departments immediately to streamline operations. Option C. Prioritizing cost reduction by eliminating steps in existing processes that appear redundant without a thorough impact assessment. Option D. Conducting a comprehensive review of current workflows, gathering data on performance metrics and stakeholder feedback to identify specific areas for improvement before piloting targeted solutions. Correct answer is B. Implementing the latest AI-driven automation tools across all departments immediately to streamline operations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Talanx employees by requiring them to identify the most effective process optimization strategy within a specific regulatory context. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency with the stringent requirements of financial services regulation, ensuring that any changes do not compromise compliance, customer protection, or data integrity. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both beneficial to Talanx and fully compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven review of existing processes, focusing on identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through direct observation and stakeholder feedback, followed by the implementation of targeted improvements with robust testing and validation. This aligns with regulatory expectations for operational resilience and risk management, as mandated by frameworks governing financial institutions. By prioritizing a thorough understanding of current operations and involving relevant personnel, this method ensures that proposed changes are practical, effective, and do not introduce new compliance risks. It reflects a commitment to continuous improvement while upholding regulatory standards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid technological adoption without a foundational understanding of current workflows risks introducing unintended consequences. This could lead to non-compliance if new systems do not adequately address regulatory data handling, reporting, or customer interaction requirements. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or assumptions without rigorous analysis, fails to provide the necessary justification for regulatory scrutiny and may overlook critical compliance touchpoints. Such an approach is prone to errors and can undermine the integrity of Talanx's operations and its adherence to regulatory mandates. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the problem and the relevant regulatory landscape. This involves gathering comprehensive data, consulting with subject matter experts and affected teams, and evaluating potential solutions against both efficiency gains and compliance requirements. A phased implementation with continuous monitoring and feedback loops is crucial to adapt to evolving needs and regulatory changes, ensuring that process optimization efforts are sustainable and compliant. Question 8. Strategic planning requires Talanx to optimize its internal hiring assessment processes to improve efficiency and candidate experience. Considering the absolute priority of adhering strictly to the Talanx hiring assessment tests, regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional and regulatory expectations? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive review of all current hiring assessment workflows, identifying bottlenecks and areas for improvement, and then designing and implementing changes with explicit consideration and integration of the Talanx hiring assessment tests specific regulatory requirements throughout the redesign and rollout phases. Option B. Implementing a new, faster automated screening system that significantly reduces manual review time, with a post-implementation review to check for any obvious compliance issues. Option C. Expediting the hiring process by reducing the number of assessment stages and relying more heavily on subjective interviewer feedback, assuming this will speed up decisions. Option D. Outsourcing the entire assessment process to a third-party vendor without a thorough due diligence process to ensure their compliance with the Talanx hiring assessment tests specific regulatory framework. Correct answer is B. Implementing a new, faster automated screening system that significantly reduces manual review time, with a post-implementation review to check for any obvious compliance issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Talanx, as a financial services institution, operates within a highly regulated environment. Process optimization, while aimed at efficiency, must be implemented in a way that upholds regulatory compliance, customer protection, and ethical standards. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of operational improvements with the absolute necessity of adhering to the Talanx hiring assessment tests specific regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines, which are paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential improvements, followed by a structured implementation plan that explicitly considers and integrates the Talanx hiring assessment tests regulatory requirements. This ensures that any optimization efforts do not inadvertently lead to non-compliance, data breaches, or other regulatory breaches. Justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of regulatory adherence, which is a non-negotiable aspect of operating within the financial services sector. It prioritizes the integrity of Talanx's operations and its commitment to lawful conduct as mandated by the assessment's governing framework. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the Talanx hiring assessment tests' specific regulatory framework, potentially leading to breaches of data privacy laws, customer protection regulations, or internal compliance policies. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established internal control procedures in the name of efficiency would also be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Such actions undermine the robust control environment necessary for a financial institution and could expose Talanx to considerable risk, directly contravening the spirit and letter of the assessment's guidelines. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the complete regulatory landscape applicable to Talanx as defined by the assessment. This involves a risk-based analysis where potential process changes are evaluated not only for their efficiency gains, but also for their compliance implications. A structured change management process, including stakeholder consultation and rigorous testing against regulatory requirements, is essential. This systematic approach ensures that optimization efforts are sustainable, compliant, and aligned with Talanx's overall strategic objectives and its commitment to regulatory integrity. Question 9. Strategic planning requires Talanx to optimize its internal claims processing procedures to enhance efficiency and reduce operational costs. Which of the following approaches best balances these business objectives with the imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive review of current claims processing workflows, identifying bottlenecks and areas for improvement, while actively engaging legal and compliance teams to ensure all proposed changes meet regulatory standards and protect customer data. Option B, outsourcing a significant portion of the claims handling function to a third-party vendor without conducting thorough due diligence on their compliance frameworks and data security protocols. Option C, introducing a new performance metric for claims handlers that heavily incentivizes rapid claim closure, potentially leading to rushed decisions and overlooking critical regulatory checks. Option D, implementing a new automated claims assessment system that significantly reduces manual review, prioritizing speed and cost savings above all else. The correct answer is D, implementing a new automated claims assessment system that significantly reduces manual review, prioritizing speed and cost savings above all else. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because Talanx, as a financial services provider, operates within a highly regulated environment. Process optimization efforts must not only aim for efficiency and cost savings, but also strictly adhere to the regulatory framework governing insurance and financial services in the relevant jurisdiction. Failure to do so can result in significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with compliance obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential improvements, while simultaneously assessing the impact of any proposed changes on regulatory compliance and customer data protection. This includes consulting with legal and compliance departments to ensure all optimizations align with Talanx's obligations under applicable laws and guidelines. This proactive and integrated approach to compliance is crucial for maintaining operational integrity and meeting regulatory expectations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. For instance, automating customer communication without ensuring compliance with data privacy regulations, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or equivalent local regulations, could lead to breaches and fines. Similarly, streamlining claims processing by reducing human oversight without ensuring that all regulatory checks and balances are maintained could compromise fairness and compliance with consumer protection laws. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing new technologies without adequate risk assessments, potentially exposing Talanx to cybersecurity threats or operational disruption that violate regulatory requirements for business continuity and security. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a holistic view of process optimization. This involves 1. Understanding the business objective, e.g., efficiency, cost reduction. 2. Identifying all relevant regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. 3. Evaluating potential process changes against both business objectives and compliance mandates. 4. Consulting with internal experts, legal, compliance, IT security, and potentially external advisors. 5. Implementing changes with robust monitoring and review mechanisms to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 10. When evaluating potential process optimization initiatives within Talanx's operations, which of the following best reflects a compliant and professionally sound approach to ensure adherence to the Talanx hiring assessment test's regulatory framework? Option A. Prioritizing the fastest implementation of process improvements to gain competitive advantages, assuming existing processes are already compliant. Option B. Focusing on streamlining workflows based on industry best practices, without specific regard to the Talanx hiring assessment test's unique regulatory stipulations. Option C. Implementing changes that demonstrably reduce operational costs and improve turnaround times, with a post-implementation review to identify any potential compliance issues. Option D. Conducting a thorough analysis of existing processes to identify inefficiencies, followed by a detailed assessment of how proposed optimizations align with and uphold the specific regulatory requirements of the Talanx hiring assessment test before implementation. The correct answer is C. Implementing changes that demonstrably reduce operational costs and improve turnaround times, with a post-implementation review to identify any potential compliance issues. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because Talanx, as a financial services institution, operates under strict regulatory oversight. Process optimization efforts must not only aim for efficiency, but also ensure compliance with all applicable laws and guidelines. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of operational improvements with the non-negotiable requirement of adhering to the regulatory framework governing Talanx's operations. A failure to do so can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential improvements, followed by a detailed assessment of how any proposed changes would impact compliance with the Talanx hiring assessment tests specific regulatory framework. This approach is correct because it prioritizes regulatory adherence as a foundational element of any process optimization. Any proposed optimization must be vetted against the specific rules and guidelines of the Talanx hiring assessment test to ensure it does not inadvertently create compliance risks or violate established procedures. This proactive assessment safeguards Talanx from regulatory breaches and ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the cost of integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This would fail to acknowledge the paramount importance of compliance within the financial services sector. Such an approach risks implementing changes that, while perhaps cost-effective on the surface, could lead to violations of the Talanx hiring assessment test's guidelines, resulting in penalties and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory impact is also professionally flawed. Rushing through process changes without a full appreciation of their compliance implications can lead to unintended consequences, such as data privacy breaches or misrepresentation of services, both of which are serious regulatory concerns under the Talanx hiring assessment test framework. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. Before any process optimization is implemented, a cross-functional team, including compliance and legal experts, should evaluate the proposed changes against the specific regulatory requirements of the Talanx hiring assessment test. This ensures that all potential compliance risks are identified and mitigated before implementation. The focus should always be on achieving efficiency gains in a manner that is fully compliant and ethically sound, reinforcing Talanx's commitment to regulatory integrity. Question 11. Market research demonstrates that a prospective client who has expressed a strong desire to invest in high-growth, speculative assets with a significant portion of their savings has a limited understanding of investment risk and a history of financial instability. As an advisor at Talanx, how should you proceed? Option A. Politely decline to engage with the client, citing their apparent lack of financial sophistication and the high-risk nature of their desired investments as being incompatible with Talanx's service offerings. Option B. Attempt to persuade the client to invest in a moderately diversified portfolio that Talanx offers, focusing on the potential for steady, long-term growth, without fully exploring the reasons behind their initial speculative interest. Option C. Proceed with the client's stated investment objective, assuming they are fully aware of the risks involved and have made an informed decision, and facilitate the investment as requested. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive fact-finding process to assess the client's true financial capacity, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge, and then recommend suitable products and strategies that align with their verified circumstances, even if they differ from their initial expressed desires. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive fact-finding process to assess the client's true financial capacity, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge, and then recommend suitable products and strategies that align with their verified circumstances, even if they differ from their initial expressed desires. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee of Talanx to navigate a situation where a potential client's stated investment objectives appear to be misaligned with their financial capacity and risk tolerance. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the company's obligation to act in the client's best interest with the need to provide suitable financial advice and products. Misjudging this balance could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage for Talanx, and ultimately, harm to the client. Careful judgment is required to identify the discrepancy and address it ethically and compliantly. The correct approach involves a thorough, fact-finding process to understand the client's true financial situation and objectives. This includes probing questions about their income, expenses, assets, liabilities, investment experience, and most importantly, their understanding of risk and their emotional response to potential losses. Once a clear picture is established, Talanx can then recommend products and strategies that are genuinely suitable. This aligns with the regulatory framework that mandates financial advice and product recommendations must be appropriate for the client's circumstances, knowledge, and experience. Acting in the client's best interest is a fundamental ethical and regulatory principle, ensuring that Talanx is not pushing unsuitable products for the sake of a sale. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's initial, potentially unrealistic, investment request without further investigation. This fails to uphold the duty of care and the principle of suitability. It could lead to the client investing in products that are too risky for their tolerance or too expensive for their financial means, resulting in potential losses and regulatory scrutiny for Talanx. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client outright due to the perceived mismatch, without attempting to understand the underlying reasons or explore more appropriate alternatives. This could be seen as a failure to serve the client and potentially a missed opportunity to provide valuable, albeit different, financial guidance. Finally, attempting to educate the client in a way that subtly steers them towards a predetermined product, rather than genuinely understanding their needs and offering objective advice, would also be a failure. This lacks transparency and prioritizes the company's agenda over the client's best interests. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client understanding and suitability. This involves active listening, asking open-ended questions, and critically evaluating the information provided. When discrepancies arise, the professional should not assume the client is fully informed, but rather seek to clarify their understanding and explore the reasons behind their stated objectives. The ultimate goal is to provide advice and recommend products that are demonstrably in the client's best interest, adhering strictly to all relevant regulatory requirements for suitability and conduct. Question 12. Analysis of a situation where a Talanx financial advisor, while reviewing a client's portfolio, identifies an investment product that offers a slightly higher commission to the advisor but is otherwise comparable in risk and return to other available options. The client is seeking to diversify their holdings. How should the Talanx advisor proceed? Option A. Recommend the product with the higher commission without mentioning the commission difference, assuming it is in the client's best interest due to its comparable performance. Option B. Suggest a different investment strategy altogether to avoid any perception of a conflict of interest, even if the identified product is suitable. Option C. Advise the client that all commission structures are standard and proceed with the product that offers the highest personal benefit without further discussion. Option D. Disclose the higher commission to the client and explain its implications. Then proceed with the client's informed consent or recommend an alternative. The correct answer is D. Disclose the higher commission to the client and explain its implications. Then proceed with the client's informed consent or recommend an alternative. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Talanx employee due to the inherent conflict between client interests and potential personal gain, coupled with the regulatory obligation to act in the client's best interest. The need for careful judgment arises from the subtle nature of the potential conflict and the importance of maintaining client trust and adhering to regulatory standards. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's financial well-being and regulatory compliance above all else. This means transparently disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the client and seeking their informed consent before proceeding, or recommending an alternative that does not present such a conflict. This aligns with the fundamental principles of fiduciary duty and client protection mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial advisory services, which require advisors to act with integrity and in the best interests of their clients. An incorrect approach of proceeding without disclosure would constitute a breach of trust and potentially violate regulations that mandate transparency and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. This could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage for both the individual and Talanx, and loss of client confidence. Another incorrect approach of downplaying the potential conflict to the client, even if disclosure is made, fails to uphold the spirit of the regulations, which require full and frank disclosure to enable informed decision-making by the client. This can still be seen as misleading and a failure to act in the client's best interest. Finally, recommending a product solely based on the potential personal benefit, without a thorough assessment of its suitability for the client is a direct violation of the duty to act in the client's best interest and could expose Talanx to significant regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of the impact of the conflict on the client's interests and regulatory obligations. The next step is to consider all available options, prioritizing those that uphold regulatory compliance and client welfare. If a conflict cannot be mitigated or avoided, transparent disclosure and obtaining informed consent are paramount. If these steps are not feasible or do not adequately address the conflict, the professional should escalate the matter to their supervisor or compliance department for guidance. Question 13. System analysis indicates that a client of Talanx, who has expressed a strong desire to invest in a specific, high-risk, illiquid alternative investment product, has a moderate risk tolerance and a short-term investment horizon. The advisor has identified that this product does not align with the client's stated financial objectives or risk profile. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the Talanx advisor? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment, document the findings, explain to the client why the requested product is not suitable given their profile, and propose alternative investments that align with their objectives and risk tolerance. Option B. Recommend a diversified portfolio of low-risk investments that are guaranteed to preserve capital, regardless of the client's stated preference. Option C. Advise the client that the requested product is unsuitable and refuse to proceed with any investment for them. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, as their instructions are paramount. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, as their instructions are paramount. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the regulatory requirements governing financial advice. The advisor must navigate the client's desire for a specific investment product, which may not be suitable, while adhering strictly to the Talanx hiring assessment test's implied regulatory framework, which emphasizes client best interests and suitability. Careful judgment is required to balance client autonomy with fiduciary duty. The correct approach involves a thorough suitability assessment that prioritizes the client's financial objectives, risk tolerance, and overall financial situation over their expressed preference for a particular product. This aligns with the core principles of responsible financial advice, which mandate that recommendations must be in the client's best interest. The regulatory framework, as implied by the Talanx assessment, would likely require the advisor to document this assessment comprehensively, explaining why the preferred product may not be suitable and offering alternatives that better meet the client's needs. This demonstrates adherence to principles of client protection and professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to simply fulfill the client's request without conducting a proper suitability assessment. This fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty and could lead to significant client harm if the product is indeed unsuitable. Such an action would likely violate regulatory requirements concerning suitability and client best interests, exposing both the advisor and Talanx to reputational damage and potential regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's preference outright without attempting to understand the underlying reasons for it. While the product may be unsuitable, a professional advisor should explore the client's motivations and educate them on why their preference might not be aligned with their goals, rather than simply refusing to engage with their request. This approach lacks client centricity and can damage the client relationship. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's stated needs and preferences. This is followed by a rigorous assessment of suitability based on objective criteria and regulatory guidelines. If a discrepancy exists between the client's preference and suitability, the professional must engage in open and transparent communication, explaining the rationale for their recommendation and offering suitable alternatives. Documentation of this entire process is crucial for demonstrating compliance and protecting both the client and the firm. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern in transaction processing for a specific client segment at Talanx. While the pattern deviates from the norm, its immediate impact on client funds appears negligible. The compliance department is alerted. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for Talanx? Option A. Initiate an immediate, detailed investigation into the root cause and potential implications of the transaction pattern, documenting all findings. Option B. Advise the client segment to temporarily halt transactions until the pattern is understood. Option C. Classify the pattern as a minor operational anomaly and monitor it without further immediate action. Option D. Immediately report the unusual transaction pattern to the relevant regulatory authorities as a potential breach. Correct answer is A. Initiate an immediate detailed investigation into the root cause and potential implications of the transaction pattern, documenting all findings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between identifying a risk and the immediate operational impact of reporting it. Talanx, as a regulated financial institution, must balance robust risk management with efficient business operations. The challenge lies in discerning when a detected anomaly constitutes a reportable breach versus a minor operational fluctuation that can be addressed internally. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreporting, which can lead to regulatory fatigue and unnecessary scrutiny, and underreporting, which exposes the firm to significant compliance and financial risks. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation of the anomaly to determine its root cause and potential impact. This aligns with Talanx's regulatory obligations to maintain adequate systems and controls and to report significant breaches promptly. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of good governance and risk management expected of financial services firms. By investigating first, Talanx can ascertain if the anomaly breaches specific regulatory thresholds or internal policies, thereby enabling an informed decision on whether to escalate to senior management and or regulatory bodies. This methodical process ensures that reporting is accurate, timely, and proportionate to the risk identified. An incorrect approach of immediately reporting the anomaly without investigation fails to demonstrate due diligence. It could lead to unnecessary regulatory attention for minor issues, potentially straining resources and damaging the firm's reputation for accurate reporting. It also bypasses internal control mechanisms designed to resolve issues at the lowest possible level. Another incorrect approach, that of ignoring the anomaly if it doesn't immediately appear to be a major breach, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This neglects the firm's duty of care and proactive risk management. Even minor anomalies can be indicators of systemic weaknesses or precursors to larger issues. Failing to investigate could result in a breach of regulatory requirements concerning the maintenance of effective systems and controls, and could lead to significant penalties if a more serious issue is later uncovered. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a tiered approach. First, understand the nature of the anomaly and its immediate context. Second, consult relevant internal policies and procedures for handling such events. Third, if the anomaly's significance is unclear, initiate a documented internal investigation to gather facts. Fourth, based on the investigation's findings, determine the appropriate course of action, which may include internal remediation, escalation to management, or formal regulatory reporting, always prioritizing compliance with Talanx's regulatory obligations. Question 15. Research into Talanx's compliance procedures reveals that a long-standing client, Mr. Henderson, has requested a specific investment strategy that, while potentially lucrative, appears to contravene a recently updated regulatory guideline concerning the disclosure of certain complex financial instruments. The advisor is aware of the new guideline and its implications for Mr. Henderson's proposed strategy. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Talanx advisor in this situation? Option A. Advise Mr. Henderson that the requested strategy may not be compliant with current regulations, explain the specific regulatory concerns, and explore alternative, compliant investment options that align with his financial objectives. Option B. Proceed with Mr. Henderson's requested investment strategy, assuming the client is fully aware of the risks and has implicitly accepted them. Option C. Immediately inform Mr. Henderson that his request cannot be fulfilled due to regulatory restrictions and cease further discussion on the matter. Option D. Seek to interpret the new regulatory guideline in a way that allows for the client's requested strategy, believing that the spirit of the law, rather than the letter, should be prioritized in client service. The correct answer is B. Proceed with Mr. Henderson's requested investment strategy, assuming the client is fully aware of the risks and has implicitly accepted them. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for those wishes to lead to regulatory noncompliance or unethical practices. The need for careful judgment arises from the obligation to act in the client's best interest, while simultaneously adhering to the strict regulatory framework governing financial advice and operations within Talanx's jurisdiction. Misinterpreting or disregarding regulatory requirements can lead to severe consequences, including reputational damage, financial penalties, and loss of client trust. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Talanx's internal policies and the relevant regulatory framework. It requires the advisor to identify the discrepancy between the client's request and the regulatory boundaries, and then to engage in a transparent and informative dialogue with the client. This dialogue should clearly explain the regulatory limitations and explore alternative compliance solutions that still meet the client's underlying objectives. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical conduct, ensuring that Talanx operates within legal parameters and maintains its integrity. It demonstrates a commitment to client well-being by guiding them towards viable, compliant strategies rather than facilitating potentially harmful or illegal actions. An incorrect approach would be to directly implement the client's request without considering the regulatory implications. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty of care and regulatory responsibility, potentially exposing both the client and Talanx to significant risks. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand their underlying needs or offering compliant alternatives. This could be perceived as poor client service and a missed opportunity to find a mutually beneficial solution. Finally, attempting to find loopholes or circumvent regulations, even with the client's encouragement, represents a serious ethical and regulatory breach, undermining the principles of transparency and compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the client's request. This is followed by a comprehensive review of all applicable internal policies and external regulations. If a conflict is identified, the next step is to assess the severity of the regulatory breach and the potential consequences. The professional should then proactively communicate with the client, explaining the constraints and collaboratively exploring compliance solutions. If no compliance solution can be found that satisfies the client's core needs, the professional must be prepared to politely decline the business, citing regulatory limitations. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that a Talanx business development manager is under pressure to secure a new high-value client. To expedite the onboarding process and impress the prospective client's external consultant, the manager is considering sharing sensitive financial data of an existing Talanx client with this consultant. Which of the following actions best upholds Talanx's regulatory obligations and ethical standards? Option A. Securely transfer the existing client's anonymized financial summary data via Talanx's encrypted client portal, after obtaining explicit consent from the existing client and verifying the consultant's identity and legitimate need for the information. Option B. Verbally relay the existing client's financial figures over an unsecured phone line to the prospective client's consultant. Option C. Provide the prospective client's consultant with direct access to Talanx's internal client database to review the relevant information. Option D. Share the existing client's financial data via an unencrypted email directly to the prospective client's external consultant. The correct answer is A. Securely transfer the existing client's anonymized financial summary data via Talanx's encrypted client portal, after obtaining explicit consent from the existing client and verifying the consultant's identity and legitimate need for the information. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a business imperative, securing a new client, and the regulatory obligation to maintain client confidentiality and data integrity. Talanx, as a financial services institution, operates under strict data protection and privacy regulations. The pressure to onboard a new client quickly can tempt individuals to bypass established protocols, leading to significant regulatory breaches and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to Talanx's established data handling policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, which mandates secure data transfer and verification processes. This approach prioritizes client data protection and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and security safeguards, ensuring that sensitive client information is only shared through approved, encrypted channels after proper authorization and verification. This upholds Talanx's commitment to regulatory compliance and client trust. An incorrect approach that involves sharing the client's financial data via an unencrypted email directly with the prospective client's external consultant fails to implement adequate security measures. This directly contravenes data protection regulations that require appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data against unauthorized or unlawful processing and against accidental loss, destruction, or damage. It also breaches internal Talanx policies designed to prevent data leakage. Another incorrect approach, which is to verbally relay the client's financial figures over an unsecured phone line, similarly bypasses established security protocols. This method is highly susceptible to eavesdropping and misinterpretation, posing a significant risk to client confidentiality and data accuracy. It demonstrates a disregard for the principles of secure communication and data integrity mandated by regulatory bodies and Talanx's internal governance. A third incorrect approach, which is to provide the prospective client's consultant with direct access to Talanx's internal client database without proper authentication or authorization, represents a severe security and compliance failure. This would expose sensitive client information to unauthorized access, violating data protection laws and Talanx's internal security architecture. It demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of access control principles and the severe consequences of data breaches. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core conflict between business goals and regulatory obligations. They must then consult relevant internal policies and external regulations to understand the specific requirements. Prioritizing compliance and client protection, they should seek approved methods for data sharing, even if it requires additional time or resources. If unsure, escalating the issue to a compliance officer or legal counsel is the most prudent step to ensure adherence to all applicable rules and ethical standards. Question 17. Comparative studies suggest that client preferences can sometimes diverge from product suitability assessments. If a client of Talanx, who has expressed a strong desire for a particular investment product, is assessed by an advisor to have a risk profile that makes this product potentially unsuitable, what is the most appropriate course of action for the Talanx advisor? Option A. Proceed with the client's preferred product, assuming the client understands the risks and has made an informed decision. Option B. Advise the client to seek independent financial advice before proceeding with any product. Option C. Immediately reject the client's request and insist on a different product without further discussion. Option D. Explain to the client why the requested product is not considered suitable based on their risk profile and financial objectives, and then recommend alternative suitable products that align with their needs. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the client's preferred product, assuming the client understands the risks and has made an informed decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to recommend suitable products. Talanx, as a financial services provider, operates under strict regulatory oversight, likely governed by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, which mandates that all advice and product recommendations must be in the client's best interest. The challenge lies in navigating the client's desire for a specific, potentially unsuitable, product while upholding regulatory obligations and ethical standards. A failure to do so could result in regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and harm to the client. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, followed by a clear explanation of why the requested product may not be suitable. This approach prioritizes the client's best interests, aligning with the FCA's principles of treating customers fairly and acting with integrity. The advisor must then recommend alternative products that genuinely meet the client's needs and are suitable, providing a comprehensive rationale for these recommendations. This demonstrates professional diligence and adherence to regulatory requirements. An incorrect approach would be to simply accede to the client's request without due diligence. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty of care and fiduciary responsibility, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or suboptimal financial outcomes. Such an action would be a direct contravention of FCA regulations, specifically the requirement to act in the client's best interests and to ensure that products recommended are suitable. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand the underlying reasons for their preference. This could be perceived as poor customer service and may alienate the client. But the primary regulatory failure is the failure to conduct a proper suitability assessment and provide appropriate advice. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's needs and objectives. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of their financial circumstances and risk appetite. Regulatory requirements, such as those set by the FCA, must then be applied to determine product suitability. If a client's request conflicts with these requirements, the professional must clearly communicate the reasons for this conflict, explain the risks associated with their preferred option, and offer suitable alternatives, always documenting the entire process and rationale. Question 18. The control framework reveals that a long-standing Talanx client, Mr. Smith, has requested a specific investment strategy that appears to contravene certain anti-money laundering (AML) reporting thresholds and internal risk assessment guidelines. Mr. Smith is insistent on this strategy, believing it offers a unique advantage. The Talanx Compliance Department is tasked with evaluating this request. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for Talanx? Option A. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled due to potential regulatory issues and cease all further engagement on the matter. Option B. Advise the client on how to structure their transactions to avoid triggering AML reporting requirements, thereby facilitating their preferred strategy. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the client's request, cross-referencing it against all relevant AML regulations, Talanx's internal risk policies, and client suitability guidelines, and then communicate findings and compliant alternatives to the client. Option D. Immediately implement the client's requested investment strategy as per their explicit instruction, assuming the client is aware of the potential implications. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement the client's requested investment strategy as per their explicit instruction, assuming the client is aware of the potential implications. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the regulatory obligations of Talanx. The assessment requires an understanding of Talanx's duty to act in the client's best interest, which is paramount and often supersedes client instructions when those instructions could lead to regulatory breaches or suboptimal outcomes. Careful judgment is needed to balance client satisfaction with compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves Talanx's compliance department thoroughly reviewing the client's request against all applicable regulations and internal policies. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes regulatory adherence and client protection. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of Know Your Customer (KIC) and suitability, which are fundamental in financial services. Talanx has a legal and ethical obligation to ensure that any proposed action is compliant and in the client's best interest, even if it means explaining why a direct instruction cannot be followed. This upholds the integrity of the financial system and Talanx's reputation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately execute the client's instruction without due diligence. This fails to uphold Talanx's regulatory responsibilities, potentially exposing both the client and Talanx to legal repercussions and reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a disregard for the fit and proper person requirements for those advising clients. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without a proper explanation or offering alternatives. While the request might be problematic, a complete refusal without engagement can damage the client relationship and may not fully explore compliant solutions. This approach lacks client centricity and fails to demonstrate Talanx's commitment to finding mutually beneficial outcomes within regulatory boundaries. A further incorrect approach would be to seek a loophole or a way to circumvent the spirit of the regulation to satisfy the client's request. This is ethically unsound and could lead to serious regulatory sanctions. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to engage in potentially dishonest practices. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves a structured approach. First, understand the client's objective. Second, identify all relevant regulatory requirements and internal policies. Third, assess the proposed action against these requirements. Fourth, if the action is non-compliant or not in the client's best interest, communicate this clearly to the client, explaining the reasons and proposing compliant alternatives. This ensures that Talanx acts with integrity, diligence, and in accordance with its regulatory obligations. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that a candidate applying for a position at Talanx has expressed a strong preference for a specific non-standard assessment method that they believe is more reflective of their skills, but which is not explicitly listed or approved within the Talanx hiring assessment test's established protocols. The candidate is insistent on this alternative method, citing personal experience. How should the Talanx hiring manager proceed? Option A. Agree to the candidate's preferred assessment method to accommodate their request and ensure a positive candidate experience. Option B. Inform the candidate that their request cannot be accommodated and withdraw them from the hiring process immediately. Option C. Attempt to find a justification within the Talanx hiring assessment test's framework to approve the candidate's preferred assessment method, even if it requires a broad interpretation of existing guidelines. Option D. Politely explain to the candidate that all assessments must adhere strictly to the Talanx hiring assessment test's approved protocols and offer to proceed with the standard assessment. The correct answer is D. Politely explain to the candidate that all assessments must adhere strictly to the Talanx hiring assessment test's approved protocols and offer to proceed with the standard assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for those wishes to lead to regulatory noncompliance or ethical breaches. The need for careful judgment arises from the responsibility to act in the client's best interest while upholding professional standards and adhering strictly to the Talanx hiring assessment test's regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the Talanx hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework, identifying the potential conflict, and then engaging in a transparent and informative dialogue with the client. This approach is right because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. By seeking clarification and explaining the limitations imposed by the regulatory framework, the professional demonstrates integrity and a commitment to lawful practice. This aligns with the Talanx hiring assessment test's emphasis on adherence to its specific rules and guidelines, ensuring that all actions taken are within the bounds of acceptable practice. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the client's request without addressing the regulatory concerns would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a disregard for the Talanx hiring assessment test's established framework, potentially exposing both the client and the professional to sanctions. Another incorrect approach, such as unilaterally deciding to ignore the client's request without explanation, fails to uphold the principle of client communication and collaboration, which is a cornerstone of professional service, even within a regulated environment. Finally, an approach that involves misinterpreting or selectively applying the Talanx hiring assessment test's regulations to justify the client's request would also be a failure, as it undermines the integrity of the assessment process and the professional's duty of honesty. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. In this case, the Talanx hiring assessment test's specific framework. When faced with a client request that appears to conflict with these regulations, the next step is to identify the specific rule or guideline that is potentially being contravened. This should be followed by a direct and open communication with the client, explaining the regulatory constraint and its implications. The professional should then explore alternative solutions that are compliant with the Talanx hiring assessment test's framework and still meet the client's underlying objectives as closely as possible. If no compliant solution can be found, the professional must clearly articulate this to the client, documenting the reasons and the advice provided. Question 20. Consider a scenario where a Talanx financial advisor is assisting a long-term client with a significant investment decision. The advisor learns that a particular investment product, which Talanx also offers, is likely to generate a substantial personal bonus for the advisor if the client invests in it. The advisor believes this product is a suitable option for the client, but is aware of other potentially suitable investments from different providers that might offer slightly better diversification or lower fees, though without the personal bonus incentive for the advisor. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Talanx financial advisor in this situation? Option A. disclose the potential personal bonus to Talanx's compliance department and seek their guidance before proceeding with any recommendation. Option B. Proceed with recommending the Talanx product, highlighting its benefits to the client, and assume the client will make their own informed decision. Option C. Recommend the Talanx product to the client, emphasizing that it is a Talanx offering and therefore aligns with the firm's expertise. Option D. Politely decline the client's invitation to a social event hosted by the client to avoid any perception of impropriety. The correct answer is A. Disclose the potential personal bonus to Talanx's compliance department and seek their guidance before proceeding with any recommendation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Talanx employee due to the inherent conflict between client interests and potential personal gain. The need for careful judgment arises from the regulatory obligation to act in the client's best interest and avoid conflicts of interest, which are fundamental principles in financial services. Misjudging this situation could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage for Talanx, and loss of client trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests by disclosing the potential conflict of interest to Talanx's compliance department and seeking guidance. This aligns with the regulatory framework that mandates transparency and the avoidance of situations where personal interests could compromise professional duties. Specifically, it upholds the principles of client centricity and integrity, ensuring that any decision made regarding the client's investment is free from undue personal influence. This proactive disclosure allows Talanx to manage the conflict appropriately, potentially by reassigning the client or implementing strict oversight, thereby protecting both the client and the firm. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the investment recommendation without disclosure, despite the personal benefit, constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This approach prioritizes personal gain over the client's welfare and Talanx's integrity, violating the duty of loyalty and good faith owed to the client. It also breaches the regulatory requirement to avoid conflicts of interest and to act with honesty and integrity. Accepting the client's invitation to a personal event without considering the potential for the event to influence the investment recommendation is also professionally unsound. Social interactions are not inherently problematic. In this context, it creates an appearance of impropriety and a potential for undue influence, which regulatory bodies scrutinize closely. Failing to assess and manage this potential conflict could lead to a perception of bias, even if no explicit quid pro quo is involved. Suggesting the client invest in a product that Talanx offers solely because it is a Talanx product and not necessarily the absolute best option for the client is another failure. This approach prioritizes the firm's interests over the client's, which is a direct contravention of the fiduciary duty and regulatory expectations. It suggests a lack of objective advice and a potential for mis-selling. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the financial services industry, particularly those working for firms like Talanx, must adhere to a strict code of conduct. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identification. Recognizing situations where personal interests might clash with professional duties or client interests. 2. Disclosure. Immediately reporting any identified potential conflicts to the appropriate internal authority, e.g., compliance department. 3. Guidance. Seeking clear instructions and approval from the compliance department on how to proceed. 4. Action. Acting strictly in accordance with the guidance received, always prioritizing client welfare and regulatory compliance. This structured approach ensures that ethical standards are maintained and regulatory obligations are met, safeguarding the reputation of both the individual and the firm.